Hello, OMG listeners. Thank you so much for joining us in the Spotify Greenroom education series. So in each episode, what we look to do is discuss a relevant topic to help advance your learning and provide you with powerful insights that ultimately, we hope, lead to better business outcomes for you and your clients. So in today's show, what we're going to be doing is unpacking the sonic science research and understanding the distinct impact that digital audio has on the brain and the body and how that translates into better engagement results for your clients. So to get this show on the road, a bit of an introduction. My name's Hayley Treasure. I'm the Spotify ANZ agency lead and I'm going to be the host for today. So that means I have the pleasure of introducing this star-studded lineup in the recording studio with me. So we've got two of the most powerful media industry leaders. And of course, we're really excited to hear their perspectives and thoughts on attention and sonic science more specifically as well. So first up from OMG, I'm joined here today by none other than Mr. Alex Pacey.
Hi.
Thank you. He's the Chief Product Officer at OMG. And then I'm also joined here by Marion Bowery. How do I say your last name?
It was good.
It was good?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the best I've ever heard.
Practicing that this morning. I thought, oh gosh, is that right? And so Marion has flown all the way from the US, but as you've heard, she's got a gorgeous French accent, so she's not actually American. And she is our Global Thought Leadership and Research Director and has been, I guess, across the Sonic Science Research Project from the very beginning. So great to have both of these guys here in the room with us today. Obviously, you've both been at the forefront of attention, at the forefront of measurement. So really going to be quite useful to have your thoughts and perspectives, analysing the opportunity and helping explain, how best to activate for clients at OMG. So let's crack on. First question for today, I'm going to direct to you, Marion. I think a good place for us to start is obviously if you can help explain what the Spotify Sonic Science franchise is and why we decided to take this approach when it comes to measurement as well.
Yeah. Obviously at Spotify, we are passionate about audio and sound and, all things that goes into our ears. Through a lot of research, we've always been hearing from our users, how important audio is in their day-to-day. They love it. There's a lot of things they cannot do without it. So there is something happening, when they're using it. It's been always, down to qualitative and quantitative survey when we've done this kind of research. So we really wanted to try and dive into a more scientific approach into, looking the true impact audio has on, like you said, our brain, on our bodies, and what does that really mean when it comes to creating that connection. We talk a lot about attention, a lot about emotions. So I think it was really a way to look at that from a very scientific manner and really trying to understand what does it really mean? How can audio really drive attention, emotions, and how does that really translate into more meaningful connections with consumers, especially when brands and marketers want to use the format to create stories and to convey a message. So that's what we've done with Sonic Science. We work with a lot of different companies that really specializes in a very more scientific methodologies like neuroscience and biometrics data. Yeah. We talked to different professors from universities. So the idea was really trying to understand, from a scientific manner, what does really audio do to us.
Amazing. I guess to build on that, I know Spotify's done obviously Sonic Science Volume 1 and Sonic Science Volume 2. So can you explain the difference between each of these studies? Like how was it conducted? And then we can talk about the output later.
Yeah. So when we launched Sonic Science, it was a couple of years ago. And our key question was okay, what's the true impact of digital audio on us, humans? So obviously we're okay, let's start with the brain. That's where you go usually. You're okay, that's what happens in our brain. So we worked with a company called NeuroInsight. They're very well known in the industry. They do a lot of marketing neuroscience. They've done that through a variety of media channels, a lot of platforms, a lot of formats. So we work with them really trying to understand the activity happening in our brain when we are listening to something. So we had a lot of people coming in a lab. I know that sounds scary, but it was very legal. We had all the papers were signed. We're all good. But the idea was really trying to understand what was happening in their brain, how their brain got activated when they were listening to either music or podcasts and ads. So that was volume 1. We saw that, listening to something was actually activating the brain everywhere, which is something that, in the past, and from previous science and previous research, we always thought that the activity of listening was only happening in one part of the brain. And with that kind of research, we really saw that, every key centers get activated, engagement, memory, emotion. So a lot is happening. It's like high intensity training for your brain when you're listening to something. And we've seen, obviously, that the act of listening to digital audio on Spotify was driving more engagement. So that the brain center, the center of the brain that really, is all about engagement, meaning how personal, you feel connected to the experience, gets more activated than when you're scrolling through social media or you're watching TV. Yeah. So that was really interesting to see, that engagement story, which is obviously crucial when you think about attention. Mm-hmm. And then for volume 2, we looked at the brain. Let's look at the rest of the body, right?
Why not? Of course.
I mean, why not, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't get people in lab. That would have been way too creepy that time around. But the idea was really to understand, and we all have that personal connection with audio, I'm sure. We all had that, chills or goosebumps when you're listening to something. So we do know that physiologically something happens. So that was what we wanted to really uncover, that physiological response to that audio stimulus. What happens when you're listening to something in the wild, as you are doing activities. So the idea was really trying to follow Spotify listeners over the course of 40 days, letting them go on with their life. They just had to listen to Spotify at least once a day. And every time they listened to Spotify, they had to wear a sensor in the palm of their hand. So, if you're familiar with fitness and health trackers, that's the kind of, biometrics data that these devices capture all the time. Yeah. So we were capturing heart rate, body temperature. Are they sweating? Are they getting, chills or goosebumps? Any changes happening at the surface of the skin? And that was a really good indication for us around anything tied to emotions. That emotional arousal that gets triggered when something happens. So, and we actually see that the true impact audio has, no matter what they were doing, just the fact of listening to either music or podcast got their emotions, higher. So they were actually active, their body was really responding to that stimuli. So that was very interesting.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for all of that context on sonic science. I think...
You're not expecting my answers to be that long, are you?
We'll get
incredible.
some short ones from you over here then.
Yeah, I'll do the one-worders. Carry on.
But before we dive into the results, because I know that there's some really exciting results to share today, I think what I did want to highlight is as well, that you know this, Alex, that we actually have a partnership with OMG globally and locally with our Sonic Science franchise too. So I'll hand this next question over to you. You can keep it as short or as long as you like. But basically, I just wanted to get, I guess, your insight in terms of the attention, currency or economy, more generally speaking. And then what do you see the value of, or how does digital audio add value to that attention, climate or currency?
Well, I guess in terms of the value of attention per se, in terms of the way we have usually communicated with clients and brands, taking aside any MMM or econometric data they may have, we always talk to them in terms of reach. How many of your audience are we going to put your message in front of? Now, the dirty secret of media is you've always known that's an opportunity for someone to see or hear the ad. Now attention measurement comes along and says, okay, well, of all the people you reached, this is the amount of people that actually paid attention. And so as a proxy measure, for want of a better term, it's incredibly powerful, has the potential to be incredibly powerful. We've spent a lot of time and energy within our partnership and at OMG more broadly to make sure that data is ingested into our tools so that we can start planning with it. It is quite scary, I think, initially in some of the things we're seeing, but But when you start seeing actual results of, okay, who's paying attention, let's face it, sorry, no one really likes advertising. So it's about, how do we reach the most people, the most attention, the most efficient way? So that's a broad look at, what is attention and why is it important. But I actually think that as a bonus, since we are talking about audio, the audio has a unique opportunity, actually, I think, because in terms of attention measurement, they generally measure two types of attention. Active, I'm actively listening or looking, and passive. It's washing over me, it's subconscious. Now, the industry generally has focused all its attention, pardon the pun, on active at the moment, and we're getting ourselves in this dangerous kind of long and the short of it area where we're looking at short-term metrics all the time, when we know, as Marion was talking a lot more eloquently than I am now, even in a second language, that passive attention is incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Particularly when we think about brands, and specifically when we think about changing people's perceptions to our brands. Because when you are actively or consciously listening to something, any barrier you have on that brand will go up.
Yep.
But if you activate someone in the subconscious, that doesn't happen. And just as importantly, that information goes into long-term memory. So when you're trying to build a brand or change a perception of a brand, that is incredibly powerful. Now, a lot of other media and a lot of your competition out there have focused solely on active. So it's very hard for them to sell the passive angle. What are the benefits of passive when we know there are many? What you have at Spotify and on audio more broadly is that it's an incredibly broad church at Spotify. Okay, you've got long form podcast, you've got catch up podcast, catch up radio podcast, you've got I can go and choose any song in the world I want, right through to here are chill playlists or lo-fi beats playlists, and you really know going in what is the mindset of the person. They are going to pay active attention to a 3-hour Joe Rogan, for want of a better term, podcast. Versus, I need to do some work, I want my focus playlist on, which is passive. That's a huge opportunity for you guys to really, work with us and measure active versus passive. So I think, really, of all media, it's very hard, for example, for television to sell in the benefits of passive, because their entire product is come in the room, switch on, turn everything else off and look. Even though we know that's not really behavior anymore. You guys don't have that problem. You've got the flip, which is the benefit. So I think, the work we're doing around attention and how it works, and we'll talk a bit later about how it works with the emotion stuff, is really powerful. It's a real opportunity for us as a partnership.
I love that. So we've got the best of both worlds when it comes to active and passive. Winning. Fantastic.
Yep, checks in the post.
So for our OMG listeners today, Marion, why should they take notice more specifically of Sonic Science? Have you got some results that you can share with us that, the guys can get across?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think to Alex's point, it was also trying to understand the role of audio in all these different moments. We do know that, we use audio for a variety of reasons, either like to find motivation if you want to go for a run, to focus on work, to chill and relax, to create some kind of environment if you have your friends, you're wanting to create like an atmosphere and socialize with them. So there's always going to be that emotional motivation that's going to trigger the use of audio. And I think really trying to understand what's behind every piece of audio being played, the reason why you're doing that, and then the impact it has. You're better equipped understanding, the mindset that person is, the physical context that person is, to really align more your tone, your creative, your message to that context. I think, being contextually relevant today is what's going to make or break the connection you're trying to have with consumers. And so through Sonic Science, that's the kind of insight we're really trying to uncover. Is like, okay, we do understand people, are using audio from morning through night. It's a companion. It's a daily habit. How are they using it? What's the true impact on their, on their brain, on their body, depending on the context? And how can we really use that to uncover insights and, and audio cues that we can leverage to be better at creating an experience that can be additive to the whole listening experience. We don't want to create any disruption. I know that's Spotify, something we say a lot. It's like, don't kill my vibe. And that's what we're trying to say, like you say, Alex, it's true. People don't necessarily enjoy advertising, so let's make it more enjoyable. Let's disruptive, and that can be addictive. If you're creating something very immersive, that blends very well with the context they're in and the mindset they're in, you can actually create a very strong connection with these listeners.
Yeah, because I think part of the research was that we could see there was quite a high transference from the content into the music or podcast content into the ad content. And I guess to what you're saying in terms of, making sure that the creative is, contextual, and you're really thinking about matching that vibe on the platform can obviously help increase that transference. Is that the kind of results that, is worth kind of taking away for OMG?
Yeah, we did see with both volume 1 and 2, with both volumes, we did see that transference. So meaning that from a brain standpoint, we did see that engagement levels were very high, even when they were listening to an ad. So it was like transfer from the music and the podcast into the ad. So there is that halo effect, that carryover effect from the content itself into the ad that was happening from a brain standpoint. And then with volume 2, we saw that still with the body, that physiological engagement was also transferred from the music and the podcast into the ads, meaning that both body and minds of our listeners are still very engaged when an ad comes up, which naturally you might think, that engagement could drop if an ad comes up because, suddenly it's a very different experience. You are not expecting that. You are, in the groove, listening to your favorite artist. But we actually see that there's like such a high engagement with the content itself. There's that spillover effect that, gets into the ad. And to your point, if an ad is good, if the creative is strong, you can sustain that engagement. You can actually make sure that you're using it to your benefits, and that's where all that memory encoding happens, because that physiological engagement drives that emotional arousal, which drives more attention. So you're more likely to be really immersed in that experience, and you might be more likely to remember things, even though you think you're not paying attention. Your subconscious is doing some part of the work. And we did see with ad recall, numbers very, very high. So that's very interesting to see how obviously that engagement gets transferred. And the quality, the creative itself, obviously, is very important.
Good to know. Okay, thank you for sharing some of those results with us. Knowing some of the results that you've just heard, obviously knowing Spotify's intimate one-to-one focused headspace, all of these things, what would be some of your, feedback for OMG listeners in terms of how to start strategizing around digital audio and planning digital audio from an attention perspective?
That's quite a broad question, but it's really interesting. I get really excited thinking about this. You were talking about the emotion, and we're going to Umbrella tomorrow, and we were talking earlier about how they've asked us a question to name one piece of music that makes us feel good, and I've literally had sleepless nights over this because people get so engaged. And I think ultimately the first thing to say to planners and strategists, I guess, is that brands are built on emotion.
Yeah. Like
first, last, and everything. It's about emotion. All purchase decisions have an emotional element, and even the biggest ones you'll ever make. If you go, I've done this. Next time you go to an open house, speak to a real estate agent, and most people buy the house on how it feels. Like it's the biggest purchase of their life, and oftentimes it doesn't meet any of their criteria, but it just feels like the right place.
Yep.
And I think we often can lose sight of that because there are so many other things to consider. So I think emotion is a key start point. And the fact that we have this research now that shows that, what we would expect potentially in terms of drop-off between the content and the ad space is nowhere near where it may be in other media.
Yep.
And I suspect, and I'm making this up as I go along because I'm not a neuroscientist. Yep, 23 years, still doing it. It's not easy to turn on and off emotion, or it's not easy to turn it off. And I think if you are experiencing a moment, that will then carry over, as we've seen, into the research.
Without a doubt. I mean, arguably music and podcasts, but it's one of those mediums that has the ability to actually trigger emotions more so than any other format too. So it's great to see that has the ability to transfer into ads as well.
I think, though, one of the... I don't want to say dangers. One of the sort of flip sides of the programmatic landscape we live in is that we chase audience and we forget context.
Yep.
And everything we're talking about here is about putting the right ad in the right context, ultimately. If you want to not kill the vibe. You know, you don't follow a focus or chill playlist with a down and dirty retail ad, right? You got to think about that stuff.
Yeah.
And we need to pull back a bit from thinking, as long as I find my audience, it doesn't matter where they are, which is kind of the programmatic mindset or the poor programmatic mindset, right? So I think it's really, really important, as Marion said, to work not only with the client but with the creative agency to say, okay, we can't just buy audience on audio.
Yep.
These guys are paying active attention to a 3-hour podcast. They're in an educational mindset. What element of our product could live there? These guys are operating more in the subconscious. Does our branding message live here? You know, so I think we've got enough clients. I'm thinking straight away of financial clients who've got a massive, broad portfolio where we could place different ads, different audio ads in different environments and see what happens. I think, you know, the one sort of barrier we come up against quite often is the lack of the visual, particularly with an FMCG advertiser, and we represent quite a lot of them, particularly within, say, PhD.
Yep.
But I think there's enough evidence. You know, who doesn't know what a Rexona bottle looks like, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, if you're launching a brand new brand and a brand new product, okay. But we're talking about legacy brands that have been around for decades, if not centuries. People know what they look like. And we just need to be where people experience emotion and land that message. So I think what I would say to people at OMG is, let's consider the emotion. Let's consider what we're trying to deliver and work with our creative agencies to try and understand where those messages can live best.
Definitely. I think, you know, a nice evolution of that as well is the kind of sonic branding, is, you know, to build that familiarity across from your screens into your audio creative. If you've got that sonic trigger, it's quite easy to understand which brand obviously is.
And that's the reason why Macca's have I'm loving it on everything, right?
It's a great sting. It's a very good sting.
And how much Justin Timberlake gets paid every time they play it. That's his song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a
Fun
Timberlake
fact
song.
for today.
There's a bit of music fact for you.
Yeah,
listeners.
music trivia. Well done. Brilliant, guys. Well, look, to wrap things up, one last question for you both. There's a lot of information out there at the moment about attention, which can be a bit paralysing, and there's also, I guess it's a relatively new currency too, so it can be a bit foreign. So if you're going to give one key takeaway today, one piece of advice to our OMG listeners about attention or sonic science or digital audio, what would that be? Who wants to start?
Okay, oh, thank you. It's not like I have a choice.
Ladies first.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think to Alex's point, it's about, you know, really understanding the true importance of both active and passive attention today, because we are consuming so much content. We are always, you know, in front of so many pieces of media and a lot of things that we are watching and hearing, and there's a lot happening. So attention has been like such a hard currency to measure, but also to grab, because we don't pay that much attention. Like, and as we're going to evolve as humans, it's going to get worse. I think the younger consumers are like worse at getting like their attention span is getting down, you know, every year. So I think it's just like trying to understand the true value of being in someone's ears at certain times and understanding, you know, that context. Sometimes that person is gonna, you know, be having like a very leaned in experience. Sometimes more like, you know, lean back. But you need to understand what's the mindset to again adapt your creative to that time. So I think it's just like attention is there. There's always gonna be attention, whether it's a passive or active attention. They both have their own value. I think you need to understand when is someone is more in the active versus that passive attention moment to really have the right message and the right tone and understanding that kind of connection you're trying to build at that moment.
Awesome. Thank you. Good takeaway.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll build off that, but I'll be a bit more sort of direct, I think, to my OMG brethren. We need to test, I think is my one message. A lot of money and entire industries have been built on doing a lot of different types of creative in the digital space. I think we've seen and heard here that there is a real opportunity, as Marion was saying, it's very binary to say active and passive, and within that, though, there's a whole range of emotions and a whole range of areas of the brains that are lighting up, taking into the subconscious or acting on the conscious. I think there is a real opportunity here to test one versus the other and see what works best for brands. I suspect, with your help, relatively inexpensively, but I think something really worth considering. So test would be my message.
Brilliant. I love it. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for joining us today in the Green Room series. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. And that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.